I've called my presentation Independence Without Isolation. And that's actually one of the themes that has come out of the policy challenge on ageing, which the Centre for Science and Policy have been leading. But it's a very interesting one, this kind of tension between independence and isolation. And for me, I think it's actually quite a meaningful expression of a particular problem around the ageing population that we should be looking at and trying to understand it even further. So I'll say a little bit more about that later on, but I thought as the first speaker up on the panel, I would do a little bit more scene setting, talk about the policy challenge on ageing, which we've been working on, and then have a think about what we understand by today's old and the kind of problems they face, and even more sort of looking ahead to tomorrow's old. So what about those people who are currently in their 50s and 60s who will be tomorrow's generation of 70 and 80-year-olds? And that's particularly important, I think, for thinking about design in the future, given the lead time for us to think about these things. It's important for policy. Again, what kind of policies now should we be starting to think about in preparation for that? And also there's an element of planning. So thinking about tomorrow's old, what could and should we be doing to help people plan for their older age? I won't pretend that the policy challenge from CSAP and Public Health Cambridge Strategic Research Network will come up with all of the answers, but a group of us got together in Cambridge a few weeks ago around this idea of a policy challenge. And we brought together actually a huge range of people from lots of different perspectives. Obviously, we've got a reasonable handle on what today's older population look like, at least at the sort of top level. And thinking about this idea of this tension between independence and isolation, in a poll, 62% of over 65-year-olds were worried about being seen as a problem by society, and 1 in 5 worry about being a burden to friends and family. So, there is a real desire of people to maintain a sense of independence, but we also know that loneliness and isolation has become a serious issue for the ageing population, and that has ramifications for health, for pressure on services, and for people and society in general.
Independent living goes from being an aspiration to an imperative. We have to find ways to enable people to be independent for longer and take all the challenges that go with that. So one response, and it's something that Rama and I have been looking at for probably 15 years now and longer, is inclusive design. How do you design product for as wide a possible range of people as possible? And sometimes the inspiration comes from disability. So the cordless kettle was inspired by designing a kettle for people with arthritis, who would have struggled to pull the cord out of the back of an old-fashioned kettle. The cordless kettle was born, and actually it's a better product for everybody. It's become the standard product. The Ferrari Enzo 2, designed to be an accessible product, and they would admit to that. Their head of marketing said it's designed to be accessible. And the door, in the way it opens, takes away a good part of the roof and part of the floor pan, specifically to make it easier for the driver to get in and out, and the passenger. Now, they know that the average age of a Ferrari Enzo owner is in the late 50s. And since they made this modification to the Enzo 2, they have recorded twice as many road miles driven per vehicle. So enabling people to get in and out of your product makes a difference. But the key here is it's a good business case. Doing it better, doing it well, provides a good business case because it's just a better design, a better vehicle. So our response to that in our work with the Royal College of Art is to say, well, how do we encourage other people to design in this way? And we've put together toolkits and information that helps others to follow the same path. And it's part about providing the understanding. What is it that happens as we go older? How is that reflected in the way people could interact with products? How do you actually do it? What are the design tools you need and the process you might follow to be able to design inclusively? And how do you do that in terms of understanding the real needs, including older people in the design process and so on? And to show examples, to inspire people that it is possible. So one final thought. We need to support independent living. That's the change we have to see over the next few decades. We need designers with the skills to innovate. Personally, I don't see that as the problem. I think the design community is well able to respond to this challenge. We need businesses with a will to change. They've got to take the risk. They've got to commission design that would be rather more inclusive and understand how to do that and how to market the results. And I think we need policymakers with a focus on people who will encourage business to make that change.
We're also looking at techniques of designing for people or creating policy for people, to creating policy, designing with people. How do you bring people into the conversation, into the room? How do you represent their voice? And here we are doing it through Bananas, a sort of craft activity where we asked older people to use Bananas to design their ideal mobile phone and then teach the person next to them to use it. And there was method in this madness, and I'll show you why. So this is some design work. Only 13% of the American public believes that technology products are easy to use. And you'll be pleased to know in the UK we're much cleverer than the Americans. We're at 15%, so we're a whole 2% better. But if I said to you, only 13% of you could have lunch today, you would throw me out the window. And yet we put up with this. Setting up the mobile phone is what came from that banana exercise, rethinking the manual. It wasn't redesigning the phone. And this is again a kind of design suggestion that we did for Samsung that they're talking to Korea Telecom about. But it restructures a manual into a different way. It forms a book that you can actually put the phone into. It becomes a center of attention and use it. And we developed this with groups of 60, 70 and 80-year-olds. It was a true sort of co-creative process. So I'm just going to round off with an exhibition we recently did with the Norwegian Design Council, which looked at how is government, business and education making a difference, the very questions that John posed. And, I too have got gov.uk up here because I think what they've done has become a sort of exemplar for other governments, taking 1,200 websites and rolling it into one. And it has relevance across the life spectrum. The old website used to tell you how to identify a wave when you're swimming or how to find a bee. What should the government be telling you about bees and swimming that the Beekeeper Society or the Lifeguard Association can't tell you? In Norway, they rethought the voting system and they redesigned the whole thing. This is just a shot of the envelopes, but they redesigned everything that you install in that school hall. And one of the things was they realized very few political parties use orange, I think apart from in the Netherlands. So orange is the color of the voting system and everything you should touch is orange. This is a passenger ferry. When they started out, they wanted to make it very inclusive and specifications didn't exist. So they wrote them and the Norwegian government have adopted them. And what happens now, instead of it taking 5 minutes if you have a pushchair, a wheelchair, a luggage or a walking, reduced mobility to get on, it takes you 5 seconds and you walk on the same place as everyone else.
I think one of the challenges we see is that we often take a systems-wide perspective on trying to understand where design intervention could add real value. And often you're up against the challenge where you need to inject a bit of cost in one area to do something different, but the saving can be somewhere else. And I think that's what makes things particularly challenging. And you see that in healthcare all the time, that you might try and make an intervention in acute care, and actually the saving is in the community. So who's going to pay for the intervention? And it's the joined-up thinking behind the scenes that is really difficult to achieve but could be very powerful in I think, instigating change.
Absolutely. In summing up against that, but also anything else you want to say, I'm going to start at the other end. John.
The premise of inclusive design is to understand the difference between a demand that the product makes of you and the capability of the user. Where there's a mismatch, people struggle to use the product. And I think that same premise can go into the workplace. We need to think of designing jobs that match the capabilities of the worker, as well as designing the workplace. And I don't think we're anywhere close to that level of maturity of thinking yet, but I think that's where we need to move to, this demand capability match.
I think the question of actually enabling people to be working for longer is really important, not least because we are putting the retirement age up, but also in terms of enabling people to feel independent as well as being part of society, feeling valued, so they don't fall off that kind of cliff edge when they drop out of the workforce, and things like abolishing the mandatory retirement age, and also offering flexible working as well as designing or ensuring there are a range of jobs that you can do as you get older. I think it's really, really important.
And I think for me, final sort of point is really the, involving people. So I think in the workplace example, when we've done some work there, actually involving, older workers. And we worked with a group in Japan where the youngest person was 75. And what you realize that a lot of offices lack is space for contemplation. And contemplation is probably where, as you age within the workplace, is where a lot of work actually takes place. So, sort of sitting there and thinking about some things is actually working. And I think, final point, I think when we think about policies, how can we co-create, how can we involve the people we're creating policies for earlier within our processes, and how can we have their voice heard within our decision making and our creation.